there's science that shows that OCD is a progressive illness, and that was what happened with me. I let
Mm-hmm.
it continue for 5 to 6 years, and look where it took me. It
Yeah.
took me to a mental health breakdown when I could no longer do anything. So if you can, if possible, seek that diagnosis as soon as possible and
Yeah.
get the help you deserve and get the help you need.
Listen, grief doesn't have to be grim. That's why when I talk about it on this podcast, it's about dealing with grief and loss in a way that influences the changes you want to make in your life. As you heal, what do you want to do next? Make a professional pivot, end a toxic relationship or friendship? I want you to have the confidence to navigate change. These are real stories from my one-on-one coaching sessions and my inspiring interviews with change makers. I'm Marceia Cork, the change coach, and this is Ooh, those effing C words. The content and conversations with me on this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only. They're not intended to be a substitute for legal, medical, or clinical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of a licensed or qualified professional.
Hello, 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 MCs. Welcome back. I am Marceia Cork, and this is Ooh, those effing C words. I want to open this episode and conversation with a powerful quote. He who has a why can endure any suffering. My guest today is going to tell you more about that statement and how it influences his work. In 2022, Sean Flores' world changed when he began experiencing repetitive, unwanted thoughts alongside months of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, among other thoughts. And that period actually led to a surprising diagnosis of OCD. So today, Sean Flores is a 3-time TEDx speaker. He's a mental health advocate, an OCD advocate with the International OCD Foundation. And I want to talk to him today about OCD and mental health matters coexisting with grief. And I want to talk about the unique impacts on Black boys and Black men. I think this is the perfect conversation to wedge between, maybe in Mental Health Awareness Month, but then shifting our attention to Father's Day, to Black men, to Black fathers and sons. So welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you
How
so
are
much
you?
for that. Thank you so much for that introduction. No, I'm okay. As I was saying to you, I've started a new part-time job. I'm having to rebuild so many different assets and parts of my life. And I was having a little bit of, depression, OCD, where, I was having thoughts such as I'm never going to be happy. I might as well take my life. And I just have to learn to sit with it and learn to live with it. But yeah, no, a lot of my grief at this current moment in time is I'm grieving a lot of my old life.
Mm,
I'm rebuilding my life right now. OCD took me to a very bad place. I lost money. I lost out on many different things. And I think only of recent have I realized what I actually went through compared to usually I just picked myself up and got on with life. But now
mhm.
I think I'm a very different person, and there's a grieving process happening, and it's really funny because obviously as I'm on this call to you, it's all about grief. And but yeah, no, I'm happy to be alive. I'm just somewhat in a space where I want to go on to really help other people, but
Yeah,
I need to be patient and take those next steps moving forward.
absolutely. And I'm glad that you recognize it's grief and that you recognize that you are grieving something different. You're grieving what once was and doesn't quite exist anymore. It's taken a different shape. And that's exactly what I want to talk about later. I was telling you before, there's this idea, well, this is what is known as disenfranchised grief. And really, that is just grief that people don't recognize as grief. So we are going to talk a lot more about that day, but to start talk more about that today. But to start things off, I want to, of course, give you an opportunity to just explain in general what OCD is.
So yeah, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder, which means you have repetitive, unwanted, intrusive, obsessive thoughts, and as a result of the thoughts you have, typically it's an anxiety. It's no longer classed as an anxiety disorder. It's
Okay.
now in its own separate category as compulsive disorders. But as a result of the thoughts that bring you down, as a result of the anxiety that the thoughts bring you, people perform what we know to be compulsions, which is behaviors to alleviate the anxious thoughts.
Okay.
So for somebody, from what we understand about OCD, most people in the common media understand is OCD is all about cleaning and symmetry. So for some people, that's how OCD manifests. They start cleaning because they're worried that the thought that they have is going to come true. But OCD is a lot more than that. OCD comes in different themes such as sexual orientation OCD, harm OCD. So the fear of hurting other people, the sexual orientation, the fear that you may no longer know your sexual identity, that you may be attracted to the same sex, or if you're gay, maybe attracted to the opposite sex. There's so many different themes, and especially in the Black community, OCD is not really spoken about. However, OCD is just a terribly misunderstood mental illness, and a lot of my work is centered around trying to engage my community to come and speak about OCD, but also letting the world know what OCD really is, that it's not this adjective, it's not a quirk that people want to have. You know, it's something that generally is incredibly debilitating for people, and it's led myself and a lot of other people that I know to suicide, to deep depression, to all sorts in their lives. So that's the best way to describe what OCD is.
I've heard you mention that now that you are aware of your diagnosis and the symptoms and how they present, you can look back even at your childhood and recognize when symptoms were present. So I would love to start there. If we can talk about, diagnosis, if we can talk about how your symptoms might have presented themselves as a child and what adults can look for in the children around them.
So, funnily enough, I actually don't remember a lot of my childhood, and I think that was as a result of some trauma that I went through. So, my dad died on Christmas Day when I was 6 years old. I saw my mum go through about 6 months of depression. She was very anxious. She had panic attacks, and since then, my mum has never really been the same. And I've now, as I said, I'm realizing I've gone through a lot of grief and just so much that,
Yeah.
as you said, the right word is disenfranchised, because I didn't know. And I still, to this day, I'm trying to go back to therapy to grieve a lot of my former life and the life I'm moving into and the things that have happened as a result of my life and so much more. But when I can go back to the earliest point with OCD, I would say when I was working in a service clinic looking after people who were addicts. So we did therapy with them. And I remember there was this young man that used to be a part of the group. He had unfortunately taken his life, and I didn't know this. But when they were talking in the group, somebody just blurted out, "Can we not just talk about him? He took his life." And I'll never forget, from that moment, I started having suicide thoughts. And I remember I never went back to the clinic ever again. I was like, I can't handle this. My brain just can't cope. Went to my bed and I cried for a bit, but I carried on with life. I'm no longer really worried about that. But then the breakthrough moment for me was not the breakthrough in a positive way, but it was in a negative sense. Was I had health anxiety. I couldn't stop obsessing about this fear that I had an STI or an STD as a result of being given it by someone I really trusted. And I couldn't stop sitting with this obsession and this worry that I had an STI. Anytime I went to the clinic, I would sit there and I'd be like, I need to be tested. Anytime I went to the toilet, I was convinced that if it hurt a little bit, it meant that I had something. And even to this day, even if it hurts a little bit, I have to remind myself it's cool. It doesn't work. It doesn't bother me. But at the time, it genuinely tormented me.
Okay.
So the amount of times I kept going back, they kept asking me, why do I keep coming back? And I said, I don't know. I'm just so worried, right? And at its worst, I paid £300 for a same-day sexual health test result, which probably in the US, it probably equates to about $400. So it was private, it was expensive, and I didn't have a lot of money then. And I realized that was enough. I was like, I can't keep doing this. I still had the fear, but I kind of just lived with it, I suppose. Nothing really too much in that sense. So then after that, I had this dream a couple of months or a couple of years later. I don't remember the exact timeline because my timeline's even still a bit fuzzy.
Okay.
I still need to process these things myself. I remember I had this dream, and in this dream, I saw the back of a white guy. He had boxers on. When I woke up, I just had this immediate belief I was gay. And it was a thought that popped into my head that said, "You're gay." And I believed it. From that moment on, I believed I was gay. I went to the toilet and I threw up. I threw up violently. I was like, what's wrong with me? I just felt like my world had come absolutely crashing down, right? So I was also in the fashion industry at this time. I was modeling. I was doing high fashion modeling. And as I look back, funnily enough, I've realized I had disordered eating. I don't want to call it an eating disorder because I want to be very careful about the language I use. And I don't want to pathologize all of my behavior, but there was an element of pathology with it. So I was starving myself. I would drink 4 liters of water in the mornings. I'll take diuretics to flush my lymphatic system. And for anyone who doesn't know what the lymphatic system is, the lymphatic system is the system in your body that drains fluid. So it helps you to release fluids, basically. And for someone like myself, I have quite naturally a round face. So I looked on the internet about how can I keep my cheekbones when I was in high fashion. So I took diuretics, I drank water, I starved myself, and I was being positively affirmed all around me. But around me, I was around a lot of other individuals who identified as gay. And that for me was constant fuel to the fire that I was gay. I was getting a lot of male attention. And I remember when I would speak to other people and be like, why am I getting so much male attention? And I know people weren't ill meaning by this, but they said things to me such as, oh, maybe you're encouraging them, or maybe you're doing something that they believe you're gay. And that for me was more fuel to the fire. It made me believe that they knew something about me that I did not know. They must have known that I was somehow gay. So all of this was just going around my head, around and around, and I was still in the industry, just trying to get on with it. But I was living with these obsessive thoughts every day. If I went to the sauna and the steam room and there was a good-looking guy near, if my brain could acknowledge he was good-looking, it would be, you're gay. If someone had good perfume by me, you're gay. It was constant. It was honestly 24/7. And I remember one of my biggest avoidance tactics would be I'd sleep until like 10, 11, so I didn't have to hear the thoughts in my head, right? Now, as that happened, I moved into a new theme. And this new theme was what we know to be harm OCD, but mine manifested in the fear of being a sexual assaulter. So when I was with one of my female friends, the thought of a trigger warning to anyone listening, I'm going to be 100% open with my story. So again, I'm not going to hold anything back. The thought of rape popped into my head, and I was high on cannabis at the time. So it heightened my anxiety.
Okay.
And I just remember I panicked. I got up and I was like, no, there's something wrong with me. No, for me to have that thought in my head meant I thought I was going to do it. And I grew up Christian. So you listen to proverbs such as a man thinketh, so is he. So this idea, whatever you have in your head, it means that's what you're going to be. So I remember I screamed at my female friend to leave. I was like, no, you can't stay. You can't stay. I was like, I'm going to do something. I'm convinced I'm going to do something. Because again, cognitive fusion, I believe the thought meant action. And that's not how the brain works. And it's something I've now realized to this day. So I kept asking her before she left. I was like, are you sure I haven't done anything? Are you sure I haven't done anything? She's like, Sean, you haven't done anything. But I couldn't believe it. So when she left, I tried to sleep. And when I tried to sleep, I had images of suicide in my head, slashing, murder. And I was like, I cannot do this. Put my shoes on, put my coat on, and I gave my keys to the people outside of where I live. It was a COVID testing center at the time. And I remember when I got sober, I was like, oh, I'm okay. Like this sense of panic just absolutely left me and I couldn't understand what had happened. So they called out a mental health team for me. And I said, no, I'm going to be okay. I just need to get therapy. I started psychodynamic therapy. And for OCD, psychodynamic therapy was the worst possible thing you could ever have in your entire life for something such like OCD. And I remember after every session, I felt worse. I just never felt better. The questioning was endless. The thoughts got worse. It was just... depression was starting to really hit me. And the final breaking point was when I was with one of my friends, suicide OCD came. And what that meant was I was having suicide thoughts. I was having thoughts of killing myself. I was having images of killing myself. So I jumped in an Uber when I was with my friend at this shop and I just cried the whole way home. And I looked at my friends when they got to my house and I just said, I no longer want to be alive. And they were distraught because I'm usually the guy in the group that everybody comes and relies on. I'm the guy that everybody, trusts and they look up to in so many different ways. And because I was down, I think they almost didn't know what to do. So my friends stayed with me for the next couple of days. And what happened was when they stayed with me, they had to go back to their lives eventually. And I was still stuck with me. I could barely sleep. I could barely eat. I could barely shower. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything. And I remember it was on Saturday, the 4th of June. I said, I can't do this anymore. So I looked up on the internet, unwanted, intrusive, obsessed thoughts. And OCD popped up, and then I looked into the OCD forum groups, and that's not the place you ever want to be because it's a miserable, absolutely depressing place to be. So I called up the NHS, and the NHS in England is the National Health Service. So they're the service that's supposed to help you when you're at your absolute worst. And they couldn't help me because they were inundated with people. So they suggested to me a book called Break Free from OCD. When you're in the mental headspace that I was in, I was having a mental health breakdown. You can't absorb anything. You're just struggling. You can't do anything. So on the internet, I found this lady on Instagram called Emma Garrett, the anxiety whisperer, and I begged her for a phone call. She picked up the phone and I just started crying my absolute eyes out. I was at breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I said, "What's wrong with me? Why am I having the thoughts that I'm having? Please, I need help." I said, "Am I a bad person? Am I a rapist? Am I suicidal? Am I gay?" She said, there and then, she was like, "Sean, you have OCD." And I said, "Am I gonna ever get better?" She said, "Sean, I have OCD too. And look, I'm living my life." And we
Yeah.
begun therapy that following Monday. And since then, I've been in recovery. I know that's really long winded, but that's a proper answer as to my OCD story. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I wanted you to get it all out uninterrupted. I have questions, of course, but I wanted you to get through it first and me circle back to the questions because I really wanted to follow that path, to follow that trajectory of the initial feelings and I'll say symptoms for the sake of this conversation, but what you were experiencing early on and how one thought led to another. And one thing is consistent. It sounds like you weren't really having these thoughts on their own. You would be in some type of environment or conversation that would be around a topic or theme, and then you would start to experience those thoughts.
it was a bit of both. There were times when nothing would trigger me, and boom, the thoughts would come in, and I'd start engaging with them. As I said to you earlier before this phone call, I was having suicide OCD, and it was just the fear
Mhm.
of, you know, I'm never gonna be happy. Why am I doing the job that I'm doing? I want to get my life back. I've got a master's, but I'm just having to rebuild my life. So, the brain knows how to play on the anxiety. So I just
Yeah.
have to sit with the anxiety. But for me, yeah, it was a mix between sometimes I was being triggered, and there were sometimes I wasn't triggered by anything. Well, not consciously that I could understand.
Okay. Okay. Now you mentioned a type of therapy.
Psychodynamic was the therapy that I did before the proper therapy that I had. So
Okay.
from what I understand about psychodynamic therapy is you're trying to get to the root of of your thoughts, trying to understand and to explore the thoughts. But
Ah,
OCD thoughts are ego dystonic. They are against your morals and values by nature. So you don't need to go into the thoughts. You just have to learn to practice non-engagement.
okay. Non-engagement. All right. So we'll talk about that too. Now, I also heard a couple of things. You said some of your research in, just looking online and trying to get answers, your signs were pointing toward OCD. What made you reach out to the anxiety whisperer?
I was at a point where I don't know what would have happened. I didn't know if I was going to be alive anymore. I just couldn't cope with what was going on in my head. And I was massively desperate for help. I wanted to get help to get better. I didn't want to take my life. I didn't want to believe my life was over.
Hmm.
I just wanted help.
Yeah. And it was producing feelings of anxiety as well.
Yeah. So the thoughts I was having created anxiety. And then because I thought I was never going to get better, that was depression. We mixed it in with anxiety. And it still makes me feel emotional to this day because I never thought I'd
Yeah.
be sitting here where I am now to be able to even have a conversation.
Yeah. And this is also recent as well. I want you to mention that the all of these symptoms, everything that you just explained to us was in a period of how many months?
So this was last year. So last year, June, I got diagnosed. I begun therapy. At the same time, I tore my ACL, MCL, meniscus, and fractured my right leg. Ended up for 3 days in hospital with pneumonia. My auntie died. My cousin was murdered. My other auntie was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which she still has to this day, but she's not really getting any better. And also, my half brother died. So there was a lot that happened last year, and
Yeah.
even my therapist at the time said to me she has no idea how life was so cruel. It was just one thing after another,
Yeah.
after another, after another. But yeah, it was last year, Saturday, the 4th of June, I was diagnosed with OCD.
And this is important to the conversation because it's one of the things that I present very early on in my conversations about grief and helping you to understand life events and that what you are experiencing is grief alongside life events that you don't really realize are grief inducing or stress inducing and then compounded. within 2 years is what I say, it leads to a mental, emotional, or physical health breakdown. And your story, Sean, is testimony to that. It reflects everything that I say about grief, without being able to have support, to express and communicate what it is that you're going through, identifying the feelings and everything that it's causing, having people that you can trust to actually be open about that. I mean, imagine if you could not, as you were going through that, not even explain any of that to your friends, because those were the early people that it sounds like you started having these conversations with. Go ahead.
Yeah. And because I didn't have any idea of what was going on in my own head, I couldn't understand what was going on. I was just struggling. Yeah,
Yeah. And we
yeah,
know that about Black men. They don't always have outlets. They don't always feel comfortable communicating and expressing anything that they feel that maybe is unlike what other people are feeling and experiencing.
yeah. I think, especially you're right, as a young Black man, quite often we hold things in, we hide, we don't speak about it. And when we're struggling, we're just so used to having to do it by ourselves because
Yes.
most people, I think a lot of people don't realize men, we're used to being loved under the condition we provide something, you know. To
Mm,
receive unconditional love it's something only really that our mothers give us quite often. And
mhm.
the world can be quite a harsh and tough place for men. And we've just had to learn to suck it up and almost to continue regardless. But there's still times I really struggle. Like today, I'm definitely struggling a little bit. As I said, I'm doing a job I don't necessarily want to do, but I want to do it to get back to a further place. But there's a part of me that I'm still worried that I'll never get my life back to quote unquote normal, but or to a place where I'm going to be more financially secure so I can afford therapy again. Just small things, you know. And these are a lot of the very real worries that men in general do have, but especially Black men, we just don't speak about this. That's why suicide is such a big factor for men in general, but especially for Black men in the community. Not enough of us speak up about it.
Yeah. And not just suicide, but also that path into the prison system and how that starts so early on in life. And the correlation between things that we have experienced in the Black community, what our Black boys experience, what could be mental health matters if they were diagnosed, then them presenting themselves in different ways and the behavior and the acting out and the path that puts you on to, having behavioral problems, right? Being seen and labeled as having behavioral problems, how that affects your productivity in school, how that affects your productivity in the workplace, your relationships, all of that. It's just so connected to not being able to express your feelings, what has happened to you, to communicate that, and having the support. So, all right. So let's talk about your evolution then as an influencer, because this is all, like I said, this is all so recent, having happened in 2022. We're just in 2023 now, and you have this massive platform already, speaking with TEDx 3 times. How did that diagnosis? Tell me about the months and weeks following your diagnosis and the path that put you on to being an influencer and using your platform in this way.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So what happened was in August, I decided to write my story, and how it began was when I woke up, I was still having all the intrusive thoughts. I was still worried I was bipolar, schizophrenic. I had BPD. I was self-diagnosing myself, and I quite literally just woke up and I said, "Fuck this! I'm going to go and change the world. I'm going to tell my story." And I went downstairs and I wrote my Google. I opened up my laptop and I typed in on my Google. I just wrote my story and I released it via a publication called The Book of Man. And what happened was when I first released the story, I was terrified of what people were going to think of me because it mentioned the word rape. And then I just reached a point where I was just like, look, there's nothing else that I can do. I've told people my story. If they read it properly, they would understand. And I remember when that story first came out and I posted it on my story and people read it, so many people reached out to me and said, Sean, I have OCD too. A lot of Black
Mm,
people reached out to me. And that's when I realized what I was doing was right. So before that, I had built up my platform from modeling, from public speaking as well. But yes, my platform
okay.
has been massively built further as a result of the OCD advocacy. And I'm honored and I'm privileged to be in the position that I'm in to be able to speak for people with OCD and to speak for the Black community and for the wider mental health conversation that does need to happen. And it's not easy, you know. I think a lot of people look at what I do and they think he must be getting paid for it. A lot of stuff I don't get paid for. I'm having to rebuild every part of my life. And I have not realized just how difficult it has been until I reached the moments when I'm like, I'm waking up, going back to a job when I've got a master's, I've got all the skills I need. I have also potentially ADHD, which is another diagnosis I really want to look into, because to give you more context, Marcia, I've obviously grown up in a West Indian family, so Caribbean, Trinidad.
Okay.
And my mother is a typical Caribbean woman. She doesn't talk about how anything, you know, you can't have conversations. And when I was looking through some of her documents, I looked at my old school records. They believed I had ADHD for a very long time. And my mum claims that she never knew, but it was clearly there on my school records. My mum never told me I had a half brother. I found out about my half brother via my drunk uncle's ramblings. There's so much that I found out last year. Last year was a year of reckoning, really and truly. And a lot of that I've, you know, put out there and I've shared because I want people to just know that they're not alone. But yeah, a lot of my platform has been built off the idea that I'm trying to be an influencer, but to influence for the right reasons.
Yeah. I've also read that you've discovered you had a stuttering problem, or you were treated with a stuttering problem following the loss of your father.
Yes. So apparently my mom says to me that there was fluid in my ear and I had stuttered for such a long time. But I remember when I went to the speech therapist and I was struggling, I used to struggle. And I don't know if this was ever brought up or hypothesized, but the loss of my dad had a profound effect on me. And to this day, I still don't remember a lot about my father, and it's really difficult. So I really want to do something called EMDR, which is I want to process my trauma and to understand more about my father, to understand more about my brain, because it's blank. I don't remember my past. I don't remember what I was like as a kid. I just picked myself up and moved on, and that's how life has always been. But yes, I had somewhat of a stuttering problem, and I realized during my mental health breakdown, when I was at my most anxious and nervous, I was actually stuttering again. So it reminded me a little bit of when I was actually like a child.
Yeah. So because it's stress induced. So, you know, to notice those types of behavioral changes in children, if you're looking for that in boys, if they turn even more inward. I know there have been children who stop talking altogether. You know, there are a lot of different things that happen when a child experiences trauma. And we're always saying children are resilient. You know, like I bet you went right back to school. I just had a conversation recently with another guest who lost both, her nephews lost both their parents, went right back to school the next day.
And that's exactly what happened for me. When they asked me in school, I remember one thing I do remember was when I walked into class and everybody asked me if I was okay. I was like, yeah, sure. And that's it. I remember nothing else. But what I think is really sad is I've realized I never really truly grieved my father, you know?
Yeah.
You know, it's a very hard thing to reckon with, you know, that he's never coming back. And I think the little boy in me is still heartbroken.
Absolutely. I see in your face that you want to pause, and so I'm just respecting the pause.
That's all right. Listen, I can continue. It's real and it's raw, you know. So
yeah. So I want to talk to you about the thought loops. I want you to explain. You know, there is terminology that then you adopt once you have a diagnosis and you're living in this world, but when you're not in it, people might not understand what a thought loop is because that's not terminology they would use, but they know the feeling. They know having these constant thoughts, the ruminating, flashbacks and memories, being triggered and having these thoughts. So explain that related to thought loops.
So the best way to describe a thought loop is almost as if, well, it's rumination, really and truly. It's rumination. You're sitting over a problem and you're chewing it over and over and over again. You're the cow constantly chewing the cud, as the saying will go, or you're the hamster on the wheel. You're the human in the rocking chair going backward and forward. And that's the best way to describe a thought loop. So what I was doing in the past was when I was getting a thought, I'd sit there and argue with it and try to understand, why is this thought? Why am I having this thought? Where's it coming from? Is it going to continue? I was just constantly asking more and more questions. And if you know anything about rumination, which I'm
Mhm.
sure you do know, but for your listeners, rumination never gets you closer towards an answer. You never get closer. It
Right.
just springs up new questions. It starts new questions, and you begin over and over and over again. That
Right.
is the best way to describe a thought loop.
Yeah. And the way that I explain it, I use ruminating as well. I talk about the flashbacks and memories, how we're triggered in that way, and the way that we think about life events happening the same way every time. So it really is a playback of things happening exactly the same way every
Yeah.
time. And so one of the exercises that I take people through is meditation and visualization. And in the meditation practice, it's meditation, META. It's my technique is meditation about meditation. So you're visualizing yourself. And it starts off this way because I'm teaching a technique of being able to change your thoughts. And so in doing this, being able to expand a vision, expand a flashback or a memory, to think about what was happening in the other room, to think about what might have been baking in the oven or cooking on the stove, and be able to, smell, think about what that smells like, think about sounds that you were hearing in another room. You are now changing the way you experience that flashback, the way you experience that thought. And so it's an oversimplification now for the sake of this conversation. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's how I teach people to start to relive these life events, but experience them in a different way.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that you mentioned thought loops, and I can, use this idea of what is used in the OCD world as a thought loop and explain that alongside what people experience as they're grieving and reliving, being triggered and reliving flashbacks and memories to, kind of parallel them. So thank you for that.
No, definitely. That does make a lot of sense. And some of the memories that I do remember of my dad's death was I saw him on the toilet and he was clutching his heart. And my
Mm,
mum told me to go and get the phone, and she always trained me for that moment because she was a nurse. And from what I understand, I had to remain calm. I was on the phone, I was speaking to the person on the phone, and I saw my mum, from what I understand, delivering CPR. Next thing I knew, the paramedics came in and they took him out. And another thing I do remember was seeing my mum eat her oats and comb her hair, but she was shaking, just trembling. And
yeah.
then the policeman came to the door to deliver the bad news, and I told my mum, and we went to go see my dad's body, and she held me, and I held his hand, and I never forget that. I always called it the cold hand of injustice. I felt
Mm,
like my dad had been ripped apart, he had been taken from me,
yeah.
Yeah.
You said your mom was a nurse.
Yeah, my mum was a nurse. She was the head of a ward. So she came to the UK as a result of my granddad sending her over here, and she just had to start nursing school. So yeah.
And what were the years like after that? You said you felt like your mom was forever changed.
My mum was never the same. My mum was when my dad died, it crushed my mum.
Yeah.
It really crushed everything in my mum. My mum had panic attacks. She wasn't able to drive the same. She was more nervous and anxious than she had ever been in
Mm,
her entire life. She became very overprotective of me, to be very
mhm,
honest. And it's
mhm.
understandable. She was worried that the young black boy she was raising was going to be ended up on the bad path in life, the prison and all these different places. But my mum was a good mum, but my mum really had mental health difficulties. She really has had mental health difficulties
Yeah.
as a result of my dad's death. And it's only been of recent have my family actually come to terms with the fact my mum needs help. My mum thought church was going to help her and just moving forward was going to help her, but I don't think my mum's ever processed that pain. And to
Yeah.
give you an example, when I was young and I was looking through my mum's stuff, I found my dad's jewelry chest, sorry. And I found his gold cufflinks. I found his ID bracelet. And I was like, why did you never show me? My mom said she was going to show me when the time was right. When was the time going to be right? I was about 23 then. So my
Wow.
mom held back a lot from me, and I never had an opportunity to know more about my father because she wouldn't talk about it. She just
Mhm.
wouldn't talk about it. When I asked my mom, can you tell me more about my dad? I said, I want to know more. I want to understand. I remember she cussed me and put me on the phone to her to her brother, my uncle, and said, "You're harassing your mum. Stop bothering your mum. You're gonna send her to an early grave." Typical Caribbean fashion. And
Yeah.
that's when I've just realized that I'm not gonna get the answers I want from them, and I really have to sit with that uncertainty. But it hurts. It's not easy. I'm still grieving that to this day. OCD was one thing, and I can almost manage that now. But as I'm talking to you, I realize I need some grief therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you recognize that. And it's, what I tell people of color, people who grew up in environments where you had to, protect family secrets, or you were taught to suppress feelings and emotions. It plays out that much more in people that grow up in those environments, because you're taught not to express, not to emote. So you're burying all these feelings, but of course they're going to resurface. You're trying to suppress something that can't be suppressed. It is going to resurface. And if you don't have coping strategies and outlet ways to express, or if you don't believe in therapy, you don't, if that's not something you're going to seek, that kind of support, then what do? Explode
It's true.
or implode. Yeah.
It's true. And I definitely don't want to do either, but grief is hard. And then even when I've met my half brother last year, we had a conversation. Um, no, actually, wait. When I need to remember when I stopped speaking to him. So basically, I found my half brother. My
Mhm.
ex girlfriend or someone I was seeing, she helped me to find him, and I messaged him. And I was actually looking at the messages yesterday because I'm writing an article on it. And I first messaged him on the 3rd of January last year. 2021. Sorry. I was so happy to find him. And I asked him, "Are you my brother?" And he said, "Yeah." And he was happy. He said that I reached out and so much more. So we had a phone call. And I
Okay.
just broke down in tears again because I was like, "You're actually real. I didn't think you were real." And I never knew that I had a half brother all these years. From what I understood is that when my father died, my half brother came to the funeral, gave a speech, and that was it.
Hmm. Okay.
That we never heard from him again. Our father and him didn't have a good relationship, and we just don't know why. My half brother's gay as well, so I'd have no idea if that maybe was related to it. My half brother wouldn't
Mhm.
give me answers. So every time I reached out to him and I spoke to him, and I was so excited to build this relationship because I
Mhm.
said to him, "I don't care what's happened in the past. Can we please build a relationship now?" And I wanted to ask questions about our father because I wanted to understand his relationship,
Mhm.
and he didn't really want to go into it. He didn't really want to talk about it. And then one time I was high on cannabis, and I messaged him and I said, "Brother, I really want a relationship with you." I said, "I don't always want to feel like I'm the one reaching out to you. I don't always want to feel like I'm the one making the effort." He basically asked me to leave him alone and to never speak to him again. That's basically what he did. So I deleted his number. And last year, when I was on the phone to my therapist, I remember I said to my therapist, "I want to have a better relationship with my half brother."
Mhm.
And as I was typing in his name on Facebook, I found out he had died on the 25th of August.
Oh my goodness.
So I turned up at his funeral, and I didn't even know if I should have been there. But his sister, and so that would be his sister, his full sister, and his nieces knew about me, and I was just emotional. And I said to them, I basically said to them, "I don't have a relationship with my half brother." I said, "You guys are the closest. I said, I'm not going to force a relationship with you, but I
Mhm.
really want to understand more about my half brother." So they told me to keep in contact. I messaged his sister recently, and she basically told me there's no need for us to keep in contact and to talk anymore. So that was more. It's more like all of this blocking and this
Compounding.
all
Yeah.
this cutting off. I've never had an answer about my father, number one, and I've never had an answer about my half brother. So it's hard. It's not easy. I'm not gonna sit here and try and make it out to be easy. I still struggle with it, and as I'm writing my story, it brought up a lot of feelings for me. It brought up a lot of, I'm never gonna know my father, and I'm never gonna know my half brother. I'm never gonna know them, no matter as much as I would love to get to know them.
Yeah.
And that's hard for me to deal with.
Yeah. How does your family respond? They see how active you are. They
Mm.
see how transparent you are. What feedback do you get from your family about the work that you do and how vocal you are?
So a lot of them are quite supportive, but they don't want me to speak about everything so openly. When
Yeah.
I spoke about my TED talk, and the first TED talk I gave about the education system, when I said on the talk that my teacher said I was bright, my auntie said, Why are you telling everybody that you're bright? That's arrogant. I said, this is what the teacher said. You always taught me to be intelligent. But the minute I proverbially went too far above the parapet, you guys have wanted to shoot me down. And my mum was worried I wouldn't get a job. My mum was worried that I'm telling people too much information. But I think I'm sick and tired of holding things in. I grew up and all I ever did was hide. All I
Yes.
ever did was pretend I was always okay, and I'm not always okay, and I'm okay, and I'm all right with not being all right. But
Yes.
my mom was in a very different generation. You know, they had to suck it up and just continue, and I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
I think for a long time I avoided pain, and when I avoided pain, pain chased me, and I just want to confront my demons and make peace with them. You know.
This is actually a great segue into your TED Talk and the toxic masculinity. Can you talk about that? Because I definitely want people to be able to go back, look at your TED Talks, follow your work. So let's talk about that one, your TED Talk on toxic masculinity.
So yeah, my TED talk was entitled "The Straight Jacket of Masculinity." Male mental health and the straight jacket of masculinity, if I remember correctly. Goodness, that was in 2022, and that year was a blur. So yeah, I spoke about the core messages that I think boys receive about grief and what we are expected to bring into this life and so much more. And I just realized on my own journey to manhood that a lot of the lessons that I had been given insidiously by society weren't fit for who I was as a person. I'm an emotional man. I'm a man who cares. I'm a soft man. I'm a man who I can be many different things. I'm a myriad of different things. And
Mhm.
I can be tough, but at the same time, I can be vulnerable. I'm caring, but at the same time, I can be so many different things. And
Mhm.
when I looked around at a lot of my friends, and one of my really good friends, Malcolm, who I thanked in my TED talk, which he actually, it made me
Mhm.
very emotional because Malcolm was a profound person in my life and we're still friends to this day. And he's got his struggles, but I admired him. I admired his strength of character, his emotional strength, his ability to show who he was, to show he could be emotional and he was okay. And he has his own struggles, but I just looked up to this guy so much. And he
Mhm.
was like a father figure for me. And again, it makes me emotional because I looked up to him so much of what it meant to be a man, because as much as my mum was around and I had male role models in terms of my uncles, but they were mainly in Trinidad, and my aunties promised to raise me when my dad died. Malcolm was just a clear example of what it meant to be a good man.
Mhm.
And it still gets to me because for years I denied that who he was irritated me because it was a reflection of who I was.
Mhm.
I was soft, I was caring, I was gentle, but I put up a front. I
Yeah.
was tough and I was mean to people. And it's not because I didn't love them and I didn't care, but it was the love that I knew. It was a language I spoke best. And throughout the years, I've had to really learn to speak another language.
Yeah.
But yeah, my talk was on masculinity and how I've had to build my own sense of manhood from when my dad died. And having people around me like Malcolm have helped me to reinforce that there's not just one way for me to be a man. I can be a man in so many different ways.
Did Malcolm know he was that influential?
No. And it took me to get to that moment on stage to realize how much I valued his friendship.
Mhm. And where's Malcolm now?
He's still around, he works and so on. We're still good friends. We're still basically best friends.
Okay.
But he's had such a profound relationship.
Yeah.
We've just had such a profound relationship as friends. I look up to him.
Yeah. Do you have in the UK, do you have the Big Brothers, Big Sisters program like we have here in the States?
I didn't even know that was a program. You're gonna have to tell me more about that program, but that sounds like a fantastic program.
Okay. It's basically a mentoring program. So bigs and littles are paired. And then
Wow.
there's also bigs and littles for big brothers. I went through that program. I was a little sister, and I'm still connected to my big to this very day. We were matched when I was 12. And I see, having experienced that myself, how valuable that is for boys, for boys to experience having this big brother as a mentor, as a guide, especially since our community, we definitely experience that abandonment, not having connections to fathers. And if the kids are only kids like me, then there's the absence of uncles, perhaps the absence of cousins. And so, programs like that really do have an impact on your life. And just to hear you talk about Malcolm, I can see how kids can really benefit from having a big brother. So, talking about boys specifically. So I'm just wondering if there were any program. And I know, of course, there's mentoring programs all over, but big brothers, big sisters just comes to mind.
There's definitely programs in the UK. So, for example, some of the places I mentioned in my TED talk, such as the Manhood Academy, West Side
Right.
Young Leaders,
Okay.
there are places that do a lot of that stuff. There's also 100 Black Boys of 100 Black Men, I think it's another organization. There's a few
Okay.
out there.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right that if you can look up to another man, it can really teach you a lot about yourself,
Absolutely.
and even the little kid can teach you a lot about who you are as a man. It's
Yes.
reflective. It's not just one way. So there's programs out there like that, but they're not promoted as much as I believe they should be,
Yeah. Yeah. And talk about because that was your second TED Talk. So what was the path? Your first TED Talk was in 2018, and that was on the subject of
the failures of the education system, but it was wrongly titled as the failures of multiculturalism. The second talk was, as I said, the straitjacket of masculinity and male mental health. The third one was on how we need to loosen drug law and drug policy to reflect the actual science, which potentially could loosen laws to be able to actually study the revolutionary power of psychedelics on mental health. Because we know that psychedelics have a profound effect on the brain, but at this current moment in time, it's being blocked and hindered by a lot of scaremongering tactics with the government and so much more. So I made the case that if we use, for example, something such as magic mushrooms, it could potentially help to alleviate symptoms of anxiety, depression, PTSD, and more. Why would we not want to live in a world where people have the freedom to be free from mental illness and so much more? So that was my talk, essentially, when it came to that.
Okay. Okay. And of course, there are going to be some differences in what is legal here in the States versus in the UK. But
Yeah.
I would love for you to share some of these so that at least people, it could be the start of our research. So talk a bit about medication, alternative therapies to support OCD and mental illness in general.
So yeah, I was on sertraline. I was on 50 milligrams of sertraline, and I think it helped me at the time. I trusted my therapist because I didn't really want to go on it myself, but at the time I needed a break from where my head was mentally. Mentally, I was in a terrible space. Honestly, I was not in the best space at all. So I trusted her. I went on that, and for a while I was carrying on with life. I was still struggling, but I felt very anxious. And the days that I didn't take it, I forgot to take it. My brain just felt scrambled. I felt all over the place. And I went on to this psilocybin trial. So I volunteered for a charity for OCD called Orchard OCD over here in the UK. And I decided to go on this trial. And this trial was assessing the therapeutic capabilities of psilocybin on OCD symptoms. And I would say since then, psilocybin has had the most profound effects on my brain compared to anything else that I've ever had and anything else that I've ever been through. So as a result of that, I started to wean myself of my antidepressants, and I've been off antidepressants for about 4 to 5 months now. So that's some of the treatment that does exist for OCD. There's other antidepressants that people use, clipramine, Zoloft, I think you guys call it in America. There's many different antidepressants, but also another medication would technically there's antipsychotics as well, but we know antipsychotics have serious side effects such as weight gain and more, and leaves you with a massive appetite for a lot of people I know who have been on antipsychotics. And psilocybin is potentially, it's not legal at the moment in the UK, but it potentially could be a massive treatment option for people with OCD and other mental illnesses. So at this current moment in time, we have antidepressants, antipsychotics, there's treatments as well. And there's also a new phenomenon called social prescribing, where, for example, if you're depressed, They might suggest you go to a club. You start being around people. You work with people. You understand
Yeah.
how important your social networks are, because we're social humans at the end of the day. So these are some of the treatment plans. From what I understand from my research, I may not have it all together because I'm not in that field yet, because I want to go on to become a therapist. But those are some of the treatment options that are available at this current moment in time.
Okay. And then in saying that, though, we also have to keep in mind that there are people who are not going to seek a clinical diagnosis or have access to that type of medication then. And so are there alternative treatments, coping strategies that you are aware of for people who don't go the clinical route?
From what I understand, most things are pushed through the clinical route. That's where more people are more likely to get the help that they need, from what I understand and from what I notice. Now, some people seek out private healthcare, whether they can afford it or not. Some people seek out private therapy because, as I said, the waiting lists, the NHS waiting lists in the UK are absolutely ridiculous. Or some people just don't get help at all. Some people try natural remedies, but this is not. Some people do natural remedies. Some people go to the illegal market. They will use psychedelics and other things. They'll use CBD oil. I think it's quite a wide range. It just depends really and truly on the person.
Yeah. Well, what's to come? What do you have on the horizon for 2023?
So I want to deliver another TEDx talk specifically only on OCD, because OCD is an incredibly underrepresented and under-researched and underfunded mental illness. That's one thing I want to do. I want to train to become a therapist at some point, and I want to finish off my life coach qualification. And I'm currently going to be training at the moment as a peer facilitator. Like a group facilitator. I'll be helping to run support groups. So that's something that's really exciting to come. I'm going to hopefully start setting up my speaking business, because I want to help other people get TEDx talks. I want to help other people with public speaking. So I'm going to set that up, because I've had quite a lot of inquiries from people who want me to help them speak. So that's really exciting. That's coming up as well. And I think like, as I said to you, Marcia, I'm just looking to rebuild my life. I'm just looking to get back to basics, as I quite often say. So I want to get more money in. I want to pay the debts off that I accumulated. I still owe my therapist $2,000 to this day as a result of, the breakdown that I had and how I just wasn't earning any money. So I want to rebuild my life on top of the other things that I've done. And I just want to really help other people. I really want to help other people. I want to get my ADHD diagnosis, which I strongly do believe I have. And I want to get the tools and the skills to be able to manage my symptoms. But also, I want to confront my trauma. I want to go back into the past to be able to step forward. But it's quite frightening, but I'm trying to use the fear that I feel to push me forward, rather than to allow it, rather than me avoiding that fear,
Absolutely. Getting the answers that you need so you can do the work.
Yeah, I have to. I've been through so much. And as I said, I never realized how much I went through until my breakdown came, and until I sit down with myself at night and I'm like, Sean, look how much you've been through, and you still have got up every single time. I still have my down moments. And as I said to you, I still have my struggles, but I'm trying to just keep getting back up and keep showing up and not giving up on myself.
Yes. I love this, Sean. And I want you to be able to share some takeaways right now. So for people who are experiencing this at any age, young or in adulthood, because there is childhood OCD, but then also adult OCD. It's diagnosed in adulthood. Tell us a little bit about those differences, and then maybe the path to seeking a diagnosis and treatment as they relate to children and adults with OCD.
So in the UK, we have guidelines under this the governing body called NICE, NICE. So they usually guide people on what to do. But there's OCD charities over here in the UK, and in the US, I know there is as well. So I know the formula in the US is probably a bit different to the formula in the UK.
Yeah.
But if you're currently believing you'll have OCD symptoms, regardless of the age, if you're a parent listening, if you're an individual right now who has OCD, or you suspect you have OCD, try and seek a clinical diagnosis, because that's first of all going to get you the right steps. Stress it to your doctor, to your GP, to the medical professional that you have to speak to, how important it is that you get this diagnosis so you can get the correct help that you need. And from what I understand about childhood OCD, yes, some people suffer from OCD from as young as they can remember as a child. And for some other people, there's a late onset as they come into adolescence and so much more. But if you have OCD, you're not alone. That's the first thing. I believed I was alone. I believed I was the worst possible person as a result of OCD. And it was until I got the proper help that I needed was when I realized I'm not that special to be alone with OCD. There's millions of us out there in the world who have OCD who don't have the courage to speak about it. And I hope that me telling my story gives you the courage to really tell your own, and hopefully it potentially allows you to heal. And some people that I know who have lived with OCD from as young as they could remember, they found it easier because they've had time to manage their coping strategies, to build their skill set, to get better as time goes on. But I know not everybody else is like that.
Yes.
So we need a system very similar to in Australia where they attack OCD as early as possible, because there's science that shows that OCD is a progressive illness. And that was what happened with me. I let it continue for 5 to 6 years, and look where it took me. It took me to a mental health breakdown when I could no longer do anything. So if you can, if possible, seek that diagnosis as soon as possible and get the help you deserve and get the help you need.
I do want to mention the process, if there's any support from schools, because, we're talking about possibly getting a diagnosis in childhood, knowing that we get these misdiagnoses. Sometimes things present themselves as ADHD, sometimes as anxiety and depression. Is schools, is the administration, special education, are there any support staff in schools that can help with getting the diagnosis?
Yes. Now, the only issue is when it comes to OCD, because it's misunderstood, most people don't know what to look out for. They don't know what symptoms to look out for. And to be fair, I kind of feel sorry for teachers. Teachers have a lot of pressure on them already, and they've also got to technically be parents in schools. Then they've got to be special education teachers. And we know how the education system is poorly funded. We don't have enough teachers for the amount of students that we need. So there are processes, but it can be very difficult. So at times, schools can be a hindrance. So when they believed I had ADHD, well, clearly nothing was done about it. They didn't seek out to get me to get a diagnosis in any way, shape, or form. I looked at my school records and it was there. And I found that out, as I said, last year. So, and I'm 29 this year. So I think that tells you something about the kind of system that we're living under.
What made you look to your school records?
I just opened up everything in a box that I found, and I just said to myself, let me take a look and see what I can find. And what I found was, they believed I had symptoms of ADHD.
Okay. And it's not uncommon with ADHD and with OCD for children to mask it, not intentionally, but it's their norm. And
Absolutely.
So they really just figure out ways to be present in class, to get through the day. And it takes adolescence, it takes college years, adulthood, and when they have to do more of a heavy lift where they just can't mask it anymore,
Absolutely.
which is why the diagnosis typically comes then.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are afraid of diagnosis, which is understandable. I understand how terrifying it can be to be diagnosed, because for a lot of people, they say it becomes real. But sometimes when it becomes real is when you have the chance to actually tackle it and start to manage it.
Absolutely.
Having a diagnosis is not the end of your life. I quite often define it as the rebirth. Now that I've got the answer for OCD, I still have my difficulties, but my goodness, I have answers to what was happening all that time. All that time I was spending obsessing, all the time I was avoiding things, all the time I was worried, anxious, panicking, and sick. I now understood it was OCD and anxiety.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Also, I say to everybody, my DMs are open. My messages are open. I am open to speak to people because I know the pain OCD put me through. And one of my sayings is, OCD was the worst thing to ever happen to me, and I'm determined to be the worst thing to ever happen to OCD. So please reach out, and I'm more than willing to have a conversation. I'm going to try and give my time. My advocacy and activism is so important to me. And for anybody that reaches out, honestly, you are not alone. I cannot begin to tell you. Take the courage. The first step is better than taking no step. It's better to have day one to have no day at all.
Yes. Where can they find you, Sean?
So I'm sure you're going to have it in all your show notes, but yes, for people listening, it's going to be at the Sean Flores. So TheSean SHAUNFLORES. That's on all social media channels. You'll find me anywhere and everywhere. You can reach out to me on any social media platform. My email is also going to be there as well. I'm going to be in Marcia's show notes. So yeah, please feel free to reach out. You can catch me, Sean Flores, on Google as well. So SHAUNFLORES. You'll see all my work, and it'll be very easy for you to come and find me if you really want to come and find me.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation, Sean. I hear so many parallels. I've already talked to you about the grief exercises and supporting that, but I would love to be able to support your platform and your work. If there are people who, seek grief support as they navigate diagnosis, as they navigate rebuilding their lives and things like that, definitely want to continue, that conversation.
Happily, I'll make sure I put people in contact with you for sure.